What is up, world? I just wanted to share something that is super impactful to me, and it's only something I've learned to sporadically implement in the last couple of years of my life, but every time I do, something crazy happens, and so I just wanted to share this with somebody where it might make a genuine difference in your life. So hopefully that's the case. I call it leaving room for miracles, but realistically it's just a method of approaching decision making and looking into the potential future with a splash of optimism, but I like to think it's a lot more pragmatic than what a lot of people think when they envision or picture the word optimism. I think a lot of people jump straight to like this hokey like everything's gonna be fine and this and that, and like, you know, I just hear like white girl Instagram posts in my head when I hear that stuff. And growing up, I was a very rigid person, and I still am to some degree. I take things seriously. I like to push. I like to drive. You know what I mean? And I like to get results. And I think a lot of people who are wired up that way tend to be a lot more sharp in the way that they look at things. And I don't mean necessarily like smart. I mean sharp, like kind of harsh. Like when you look at something, you look at it for exactly what it is. It's the straight up facts and nothing else. And that's all well and good. But it's important to remember that a couple of key things are true about our life and about our minds. Number one is that we are wired to look for threats and to look for things that are going to go wrong. And that's just a part of our key survival makeup. It's what keeps us alive, but it doesn't help you have a good life or be happy. And a lot of your decisions can end up leaving you in this weird juxtaposed position, because half of your decisions are coming from this illusion that you want to be happy, and the wiring of your brain is coming from a place where your decisions are meant to keep you alive, and they're looking actively for threats or things that would maybe be opposed to your happiness. So your mind is working on an operating system that's directly defying the conscious result that you want, which is like a good state of being. And so you'll end up with a lot of things that seem to not really conform with each other. And so that's one important thing to keep in mind, is that your mind is always operating, looking for negatives, looking for potential threats, okay? The second thing to remember is that you are not omnipotent, you are not all-knowing, you are not omnipresent. That's the role of your creator if you believe in one. And the reason it's important to remember that is because a lot of times when we go into a new decision, or we're about to take a risk, or you're looking through a new opportunity and what that might look like on the back end or in the potential future, we start jumping into all this mental math about, oh, if I do this, this is how they're going to respond, or, you know, this is how this set of events will play out. And it's really important to keep in mind that your thoughts about looking at the potential future are just like lines on a ruler, okay? There's an inch, right? 2 lines make an inch, but then you can divide those 2 lines into an even smaller fractal, and those will become centimeters, and then millimeters, and then we start dissecting into smaller and smaller things until we're measuring atoms. And then when we run out of room there, we start measuring protons and neutrons and electrons, and we run out of it, and we can just break things down infinitely into smaller and smaller bits of information, and it only overcomplicates your decision-making process. It only adds to the amount of information that you have to decipher. And there is an infinite amount that we can break things down into, or that we can break facts down into. There is a finite amount of mental capacity and emotional capacity that you have, that I have, to sift through that information and to make a great decision. And so ultimately, by the time you're done sifting through all that literally endless information, or endless amounts of potential outcomes, you've split your emotions, your certainty, your mental acuity into fractals that are directly proportionate to how far you started to think down the problem line. So if you thought about 2 potential outcomes, you split yourself in half. If you're thinking about 15 or 18 or 25 different ways that this could go wrong or things that are going to get in my way, well, guess what? You are now in 25ths of the person that you were when you were initially going to make the problem. And there is just a finite amount of space in your computing power where you can see threats, where you can actually understand what's going to happen in the future. So you need to be able to protect that energy, because ultimately you will be faced with a problem. You will be faced with a setback. And the odds of it being exactly what you anticipated it was going to be are fairly low. Does it happen? Yeah, absolutely. Is it important to consider your choices? For sure. But there is absolutely a law of diminishing returns on that activity and on that thought process. And I think we are way too insensitive to where it's at. It probably happens a lot earlier than we think or than we feel. And so if you're a person who struggles with decision making, this may be why. If you're a person who struggles with commitment, this may be why. If you're a person who does fine at those things, but your friends call you a pessimist, this may be why. And if you miss out on opportunities or things don't work out as good as you'd like them to, you might have to look in the mirror on this issue the same as I did and realize that in all that mental math that you're doing on the potential threats or negatives to a situation or just the outcomes in general, we allocate a lot of energy to, just like I said, threats and negative outcomes. But when you hear someone talk about things, you rarely hear someone really dive into what are the potential positive outcomes of this situation, because there is an equal amount of opportunity for those things to happen, for an unseen positive to act in your favor and influence your outcome. But we don't spend our mental energy there. We don't spend our emotional energy there, yet they're just as likely. They're just as frequent. And when we have, this is the worst part, unforgivable sin about human beings. When they happen, we write them off because they weren't part of what we foresaw when we made a decision. So we see someone else have something work out and we call it luck, right? But there was a piece of factual information that led to that positive outcome, and it wasn't just luck. You just didn't think about it, or they didn't think about it before it happened, and so it didn't seem intentional, but we call it luck. But then all of a sudden, if something negative comes to fruition and actually becomes a negative consequence, and you anticipated that being the case before you made the decision, it just recreates this self-fulfilling prophecy where, oh, yep, I knew that was going to happen. I knew I was going to get screwed. I knew this, that, or the other. And all of a sudden, it just reaffirms that you should be looking for threats, and then you're going to be missing out on opportunities, perpetually. And it becomes a stronger and stronger mental muscle the more that you do that. So that's a very long-winded way to paint the picture that we have this mental operating system. It keeps us from accounting for positive influences in our outcomes, positive inputs in what affects our outcomes or outputs. And so it's important when you're making decisions, when you're about to embark on something new, or when you're considering the outcomes of a given thing, that you start to implement and leave room for positive things or miracles in your mental algebra and your mental math. So hopefully that's helpful to somebody. I found it really reassuring because for some reason those ideas merged where now I have, a practical reason to implement optimism into my daily life. And I promise you, after just a handful of instances where that is proved to you as true, and odds are it doesn't need to happen in the future, you can look back into your past and see where, hey, you know what? There was room for miracles in a situation. I totally wrote it off as something that was just, I was so busy looking at the negatives that I missed the couple of cool things that were just exponentially crazy and positive about that situation, and that maybe shouldn't have happened, or I wouldn't have thought they would have happened, but they did anyway, and that was a super positive thing. And as you find that evidence in the past, you'll look for it in the future and make room for it in the future. And the more you do that, the more you can capitalize on it, and the more it will create that mental muscle of seeing not just threats, but opportunities too. Not seeing just negative things, but optimistic and positive things too. And that changes your emotional energy. It helps keep you certain and unified when you're making decisions. and that's what leads to great decision making. So hopefully this is something that helps you. I know it's long-winded. Hopefully you are patient enough to make it through, and you can use this on something in your life or teach it to somebody where it'll make a positive impact on them. See you guys in the next one.